So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Collins webinar on thinking and working mathematically, related around international primary maths. This is our second international primary maths webinar around the new editions of this course, and this one is specifically, as titled, about thinking and working mathematically. For those that have attended some of our webinars before, it's a slightly different webinar in that we're lucky to have a pre-recorded presentation that Peter Clarke, the author of International Primary Maths and the series editor, will be presenting. So we'll have a recorded presentation which is around 17-18 minutes long, and then, as we did with the first webinar for International Primary Maths, we'll be having a Q&A session with myself and Holly, who is the editor of the series. As usual, if you have any questions that you'd like us to answer within the Q&A session, please put them in the Q&A box. And we'll deal with them after the presentation, and then if there's other comments, keep those in the chat, which we will be monitoring. So really the main thing is to get on with the presentation. I will be back after the presentation to give a little bit more details of the Q&A and the follow-up. So really I'm going to leave it now to start. So if we could start the presentation, and I will be back in about 17 minutes to host a Q&A. I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Hello and welcome. Hello and welcome. My name is Peter Clarke, and I'm the series editor of Collins International Primary Maths. In this webinar, I'm going to talk about one of the most important new features of the revised Cambridge Primary Mathematics Curriculum Framework, and that is the processes of thinking and working mathematically, and how the new edition of Collins International Primary Maths encourages and develops these characteristics. In the revised Cambridge Primary and Lower Secondary Mathematics Curriculum Frameworks, the problem-solving strand and associated learning objectives have been replaced with 4 pairs of thinking and working mathematically characteristics. The thinking and working mathematically characteristics represent one of the most significant changes to the updated Cambridge Curriculum Framework. In response to this, the new edition of Collins International Primary Maths has incorporated and interwoven thinking and working mathematically throughout all of the components. This reflects the course's most substantial change to the teaching and learning of mathematics. Thinking and working mathematically is based on work by Mason, Burton, and Stacey. It places an emphasis on learners actively engaging with their learning, talking with others, challenging ideas, and providing evidence that validates conjectures and solutions. It's about seeking to make sense of ideas, building connections between different facts, procedures, and concepts, and importantly, developing higher order thinking skills that assist them in viewing the world in a mathematical way. Thinking and working mathematically contrasts with learners simply following instructions and carrying out processes that they have been shown how to do without appreciating why such processes work or what the results mean. Through the development of each of the thinking and working mathematically characteristics, learners are able to see the application of mathematics in the real world much more clearly, and also, crucially, to develop the skills necessary to function as citizens who are autonomous problem solvers. If learners at any of the Cambridge international stages are to gain meaning and satisfaction from their study of mathematics, then it is vital that thinking and working mathematically underpins their experience of learning the subject. The 4 pairs of thinking and working mathematically characteristics that Cambridge International identifies as fundamental to a meaningful experience of learning mathematics are represented diagrammatically and referred to as the thinking and working mathematically star. Specializing and generalizing relate to finding and considering examples that meet specific mathematical criteria. Conjecturing and convincing relate to forming, questioning, and justifying own or others' mathematical ideas. Characterizing and classifying relate to the identification and grouping of objects, which includes shapes, numbers, and graphical representations, according to their mathematical properties. Critiquing and improving relate to reflecting on and refining mathematical strategies, representations, or solutions. Critiquing and improving run through the 6 other characteristics, demonstrating the importance of considering how to refine your own methods or strategies when thinking and working mathematically. The 8 characteristics of thinking and working mathematically are defined in the Cambridge Curriculum Framework as shown here. Also, as with the learning objectives in the framework, each of the 8 thinking and working mathematically characteristics has a unique code which appears in the framework document and other Cambridge resources, as well as throughout Collins International Primary Maths. You may wish to pause here to read through each of the definitions of the thinking and working mathematically characteristics. All 8 thinking and working mathematically characteristics can be applied across all of the Cambridge Curriculum Framework and across all mathematical strands and substrands, although the prominence of different characteristics may change as learners move through the stages. Any characteristic can be combined with any other characteristic. Characteristics should be taught alongside content learning objectives and should not stand alone. The 4 pairs of characteristics intertwine and are interdependent, and a high-quality mathematics task may draw on one or more of them. Just as thinking and working mathematically is at the very heart of Cambridge primary mathematics, so too is this approach to the teaching and learning of mathematics a core feature of the new edition of Collins International Primary Maths. At each stage, opportunities are provided in each of the 27 units for learners to develop the 8 thinking and working mathematically characteristics. Specific guidance is provided in the unit introductions, which highlight teaching and learning opportunities, particularly in relation to the unit's learning objectives that promote the thinking and working mathematically characteristics. At each of the 5 phases of a Collins International Primary Maths lesson, that is, revise, teach, practice, apply, and review, guidance is given in the lesson plan on how to promote the thinking and working mathematically characteristics. Whenever any of the 8 characteristics is being promoted in a lesson plan, this is shown using the initials T, W, M, followed by the Cambridge Curriculum Framework code that identifies exactly which of the 8 characteristics is being developed. In addition to the support provided in the unit introductions and individual lesson plans, Collins International Primary Maths provides an adapted version of the Thinking and Working Mathematically STAR that provides a list of prompting questions that teachers may find helpful when asking learners questions specifically aimed at developing each of the thinking and working mathematically characteristics. This STAR is located in each of the teacher's guides. This Thinking and Working Mathematically STAR, located at the back of the Stages 1 and 2 students' books, contains pupil-friendly definitions of each of the 8 thinking and working mathematically characteristics. The STAR is aimed at helping learners think specifically about what is required when they are undertaking an activity designed to develop a specific thinking and working mathematically characteristic. This Thinking and Working Mathematically STAR is located at the back of the Stages 3 to 6 students' books, and like the version for the Stages 1 and 2 students' books, it contains pupil-friendly definitions of each of the 8 thinking and working mathematically characteristics. However, this Stages 3 to 6 version of the STAR also includes some sentence stems that aim to help learners to talk with others, challenge ideas, and explain their reasoning. Learners should be encouraged to use the STAR, especially in Stages 3 to 6, whenever working on an activity that develops thinking and working mathematically. This includes whole class discussions and activities, group and pair activities, which include those located in the students' books, as well as additional practice activities, the apply slides, and also the individual questions from the workbook. As in the Collins International Primary Maths Teacher's Guide, learning opportunities aimed at developing thinking and working mathematically are also identified in the Stages 3 to 6 students' book and workbook. Where a question or activity promotes thinking and working mathematically, this is clearly identified using the Thinking and Working Mathematically STAR and the framework code that identifies exactly which of the 8 characteristics is being developed. A variation of the Thinking and Working Mathematically STAR is also included in each progress book. This version of the STAR includes I can statements of each of the 8 thinking and working mathematically characteristics. Its purpose is to provide an opportunity for learners, twice a term, to think about each of the statements and record how confident they feel about thinking and working mathematically. Thinking and working mathematically should not consist of a separate end of lesson or unit activity, but should be embedded throughout lessons in every unit of work. Each of the 8 thinking and working mathematically characteristics can be combined with most teaching topics. So when planning a unit of work, teachers should begin with one or more learning objectives and seek to draw on one or more thinking and working mathematically characteristics. Thinking and working mathematically also enables learners' thinking to become visible, which is a crucial aspect of formative assessment. This and the following 3 slides include some examples of the range of activities suitable for developing each of the thinking and working mathematically characteristics. It is these types of activities and more that are included throughout Collins International Primary Maths to assist the teaching and learning of arguably the most significant change to the revised Cambridge framework. You may wish to pause on this slide and the following 3 slides in order to take time to read through some of these examples. It is highly recommended that as schools begin to prepare for the introduction of the new framework in September 2021, that in particular they start to think about teaching the processes of thinking and working mathematically. Some of the examples on these 4 slides could be used as a springboard for the types of activities that promote each of the thinking and working mathematically characteristics. To summarise, thinking and working mathematically is presented as 4 pairs of characteristics: specialising and generalising, conjecturing and convincing, characterising and classifying, critiquing and improving. Any of the 8 characteristics can be combined with any other characteristic. Content learning objectives from the 3 strands can be taught standalone, but the thinking and working mathematically characteristics will be taught alongside these content learning objectives and not standalone. The development of one or more of the characteristics should be incorporated into every unit of work, but that doesn't mean necessarily into every lesson. Each of the 8 characteristics apply across all 6 stages. Thinking and working mathematically supports mathematical knowledge, understanding and skills in all strands of the Cambridge Curriculum Framework. When learners think and work mathematically, they actively engage with their learning of mathematics. They try to make sense of ideas and build connections between different facts, procedures, and concepts. Learners who do not think and work mathematically can carry out procedures that they've been taught, but they may not understand why these procedures work or what the results mean. Noticing inconsistencies, patterns, and different representations, and having opportunities to practice, reflect, and question encourage learners to think and work mathematically. For further information about the Cambridge Curriculum Framework, including how Collins International Primary Maths supports the framework, as well as details on the components of Collins International Primary Maths and other webinars and PowerPoint presentations to use within your school, go to the training package available on the Collins website. Thank you.
So, hello again, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that short presentation. You'll see as well, I have Holly on screen with me. So we're here largely now to answer any questions that you might have with regard to thinking and working mathematically or international primary maths. Just a couple of things to note before we start the Q&A. Just remember to any questions that go in the Q&A box, if you stick them in there, we will be addressing them. We won't be doing them necessarily in the order that they've gone in the box, but we'll try to do them in the best order for a decent flow of questions and answers. There is a recording of the presentation. You'll notice a couple of times during the presentation that Peter referred to wanting to pause during that part of the presentation. You'll all be sent the recordings, so if you want to go back and look at those particular slides and pause on them, that's a really good time to do so. And you will also be emailed with details of certificates of attendance. If there is any other information, or you want to know any information about that, please do contact us on the Collins International email address that you can see on screen now. The one request we do have is that if you do contact us, please just tell us what school you're from. It helps us to deal with the query as quickly as we possibly can. So that's really sort of answered a couple of the questions in the Q&A box already, which is the soft copy of the lecture and the recording. That is all going to be sent to you, and you will get the certificate of attendance. So in terms of some of the other questions, first of all, before we even move on to that, I'm afraid, Holly, I have a question of my own that came to me during the presentation, which, having worked on the series, I'm sure you'll be able to address, but it's quite interesting. And that's really, we talk a lot now about thinking and working mathematically as a concept within the new edition and the new framework. But how much of what is sort of addressed now as thinking and working mathematically was in the previous edition under a different label? Is there an element where some of the parts of it have been reused or reimagined to fit this new criteria?
Yeah, a lot of the elements of thinking and working mathematically, when you drill down into them, will be things that maths teachers and learners have been doing before and were included in the first edition of Collins International Primary Math. But thinking and working mathematically as a concept really brings it to the fore. As Peter mentioned in his first webinar, initially it was a problem solving strand that was a kind of standalone objective that was taught separate to the other parts of math, whereas thinking and working mathematically has now been introduced throughout the course. So you'll be learning about shape, geometry and measure, but also thinking and working mathematically. A lot of the language around it is things that will be used in the classroom anyway, things like convincing, improving, categorizing. So there will be elements that are really familiar to teachers, hopefully, and will be easy to introduce. What Collins has done, along with the Cambridge framework, has really brought that to the fore, highlighting where those areas are and allowing areas for learners to become a bit more cognizant of what they're doing instead of just doing it because the teacher tells them to, and giving them a bit more ownership over it.
And actually there's a sort of question that goes quite well with that that's come within the chat box, which I have noticed, but please, if you've got questions, put them in the Q&A if possible, because I spot them a little bit more easily. But the one in the chat box that I have seen, which is whether people would like to know whether in the new framework in the coming year, the concept of problem solving, has that disappeared from the Cambridge Primary, or is it still there?
It hasn't disappeared as a concept and with the ideas of problem solving. There's a different approach to it, as I said, with it being woven in throughout the entire course. So Collins has still got the concept to do with real life situations and applying maths in that sort of context to problem solve. And some of the TWM characteristics are also similar to that, things like improving and convincing people of things to do with problem solving is still there. So it hasn't been removed, it's just been better incorporated into the course.
Cool. Which actually also then follows on to another question that I think that follows on from that, which is one of the questions is, how is thinking and working mathematically different from real world situations? So is there a difference between thinking and working mathematically in real world context of maths?
There's a difference in the sense that you can apply thinking and working mathematically to straight maths that isn't a real world situation. So for example, you could be looking at shapes isolated on their own and categorizing them and looking at their different classifications that you've got. You could also apply that to a real world situation with shapes, looking at buildings and the different 3D shapes that make that up. So thinking and working mathematically can be applied across all areas of it. But it definitely does come into play really strongly when looking at real world situations. So that's something that we've endeavoured to do in the Collins course, to make sure that there are loads of different applications and different ways of looking at things, so that there's more immediacy to the maths that learners are looking at, and they feel that it's something that can be applied in their real life, real worlds.
Cool. So sort of moving on from that, there's a question from someone whose school is new to Cambridge. So the question there is, do the resources provide some reasoning questions, either on the slides or in the textbook? So either in the teacher's guide or in the textbook are the reasoning questions?
Yes, definitely. They're spread throughout the entire course. So the teacher's guide offers lots of opportunities for teachers to work with learners and allow them to reason and offer solutions in a more independent way. And the student book and workbook also offers those questions in various different formats, whether it's independent or paired work. I think the main area is in the apply interactive slides that we offer, which are lots of real world situations and opportunities for learners to apply what they've learned and to develop their reasoning skills there.
Excellent. The next question is really about teaching aids, and is, do we have to use so do schools have to use teaching aids for teaching thinking and working mathematically, or is it sort of generally, I mean, it's largely incorporated, but Holly, what's your view on the need for teaching aids?
Yeah, there's a lot of flexibility in our course, meaning that if you have teaching aids available, they can be incorporated. But we've also got lots of digital offerings, meaning that you don't need the physical resources, which fits in with the concrete pictorial abstract approach that we've got with International Primary Maths. So we have resource sheets at the back of the teacher's guide, which offer cutouts and activities for learners to do. But throughout the teacher's guide lesson plans, there are suggestions for how it can be adapted based on what your school has available and what would be best for the needs of your learners.
Excellent. Right, we've got some good questions coming in, so thank you everyone for sending in these questions. The next three actually are definitely very challenging questions and very interesting, and I'll be very interested to see, particularly this first one, sort of in terms of what we've discussed and what we've been thinking about so far. But the question is really, how does somebody know, how would a person know that they are thinking mathematically? So how do you assess whether, and I guess you turn that on its head, how does a teacher know and be able to assess that a student is truly thinking and working mathematically? It's a tough question.
And there are a number of ways of doing that, some more sort of concrete and that are supported by our course. First of all, I'd say that the key areas where you might become aware that you're thinking working mathematically is a sense of independence and ownership over the maths that you're doing. So if you're a teacher working with a learner, you'd be expecting to see them thinking critically about the sort of activities they're doing and not just simply doing a calculation and not thinking about why they are doing it and what ways they could do it differently and the different strategies they could apply. So it would be attempting to critique and improve and convince people of why what they're doing is the most suitable thing to do in that situation. So that's the sort of overall approach that hopefully learners who are thinking working mathematically will be taking. A more concrete way of knowing that learners are doing that is supported by the course itself. As Peter said in the webinar, there are loads of different things on the page in the book that helps teachers to know that they are incorporating it into their teaching. Things like the codes and the stars on the page, the student-friendly stars that are at the back of the book, which offer them sentence starters so that they can start to incorporate that kind of language into the course. And we have within the workbook and slides tried to incorporate some of that language, so there'll be questions saying, explain how you are convincing, how could you improve on this, categorize these shapes. So they're really always being addressed using that language, and it's not a sort of separate thing that they wouldn't be using anyway in their learning.
Excellent. Okay. So there's a couple of questions now on accessibility, and I think that they're both really Good questions, and interesting questions. The first one is for lower ability students, problem solving can be a challenging concept, and that's absolutely true. Will thinking and working mathematically be more accessible for those who are less able mathematically? Is thinking and working mathematically more accessible than problem solving as a concept?
I think one of the benefits that should hopefully translate into mixed ability classes and the different abilities of learners is the fact that thinking and working mathematically is happening consistently across the entire course, and it's embedded throughout every lesson that they're doing. So it's something that they become really familiar with, instead of perhaps doing problem solving for 2 weeks at the end of the year and then not going back to it until the next stage. So it is something that you'll be able to work with learners on and develop their recognition of it so that they become more comfortable using it, and it's not something that comes out of the blue for them. In terms of making sure that we've applied thinking and working mathematically for all learners, in the course we've got 3 levels of challenge, 1 to 3, based on different abilities, which allow the course to be used flexibly, and we've made sure that there's opportunities for thinking and working mathematically across all 3 challenge levels. So it's not something that is reserved for high ability learners. Everyone can use it and should become familiar with it as they work.
Cool. And so leading on from that, I think in terms of a different accessibility question it's a question about how can we apply thinking and working mathematically efficiently to English as second language learners. So for students whose first language isn't English, whether they're second or additional or whatever, are there any tips about, or is there any help in applying this concept to those students?
Yeah, I think initially some of the language of TWM, especially for English as a second language learners, might be a bit unfamiliar to them, things like conjecturing, and even to stage 1 learners who do speak English as their first language, it's words that they might not have come across in certain cases. And I think support from Collins comes in the form of the stars that we've included at the back of the book. These are big, colourful, blown up stars at the back of the student's book, which fills a full page and offers a really learner friendly approach, offering different sorts of questions that might lead to conjecturing. So while they might not understand what the word means initially, they'll be able to use those examples to get a sense of the kind of activities and thoughts that they'll be doing and having, which will then lead to that. So I'd advise, in terms of making it suitable, it's just really spending time on that language and speaking to learners about what they think that means, to make sure there's a clear understanding behind that word, because sometimes it might seem a little daunting, but the ideas are quite basic behind it.
And I'd sort of add to that, one of the things that we've always done at Collins, Collins has a really significantly nice position in some ways, that we have an editorial team like Holly, who are well versed in and sort of editing educational materials both for international and UK schools. We also have a fairly large and significant English as a second language publishing editorial team and authors, and quite often where we have difficult concepts, we've got the ability to consult internally about language and making sure that the language in the text is not a barrier. We've always been very keen on making sure that the language that's within the text is not a barrier. It's as much about making sure that you don't make language overly complicated for English as second language, so that the language isn't a barrier to learning maths, and thinking and working mathematically wouldn't be any different to that. So another question from this one from Saudi Arabia. I've been teaching Collins for the last 3 years in our school. I was going through the new book, and some topics are removed from the new year 2. Like doubles and remainders. Why are they being removed?
All of the changes between the first and second edition have been done to reflect any changes in the Cambridge curriculum. So the decision making is on their part, and we've made sure that we're fully aligned with it and can fully support teachers in using it in their classrooms. in terms of why those decisions were made, a lot of it is to do with consolidating and making progression throughout the stages much easier. So a lot of thought from Cambridge has gone into making sure that the objectives are clear and don't overlap and duplicate, which has meant that certain areas of maths have moved up and down stages. So while those might have been removed from stage 2, they will be present in either stage 1 or stage 3, depending on how the objectives have shifted around. All of the same mathematical content and learning is there, just in slightly different formats.
Okay, excellent. And there is a question in general about the framework from someone that the framework is mentioned in Peter's presentation about new framework coming in September. I'm quite happy to pick up and answer this one. Someone's asking just for more details about that. The framework that's referred to is the Cambridge framework, and that is now quite widely available. I think you can get copies of it, or you can speak to Cambridge. You'd need to speak to Cambridge International Assessment first, and they would be able to give you details of that framework. So that's the framework that is referred to in the presentation. There is a couple more questions. In fact, only one really that hasn't been dealt with. So if people have any more questions, just remember to put them in the Q&A. We do have a little bit more time, but if we've answered everyone's questions, then that's very good. There is one particular one by Nigel Sawyer, who's asked about the slides and activities and resources easily uploading onto an online platform like Teams or Google Classroom. And that is a really, really good question, and it's quite an interesting question. We are working in both scenarios to develop the resources to make it easier to upload, particularly into Google Classroom, which we know a lot of schools are using. It's something that is a fairly early project that we're talking to Google and other people about. I'd actually make a plea to Nigel. I hope you're still listening, and that is that if you are a school that's using Google Classroom regularly, and in fact, there's a lot of people on the call, so anyone else who is particularly using Google Classroom and has used International Primary Maths, I am personally involved in a project to try to make some resources available piloting into Google Classroom. So if anyone is using Google Classroom regularly and would be interested in talking to us about how we can better make the resources able to fit into Google Classroom, and then trialing some resources for us and with us, if you drop me an email, I can be reached at the Collins International email address that's on screen. It's the easiest one because it's there. If you drop me a note and say which school you're from, and we can have a conversation about what we're doing with Google Classroom. But I'd be particularly interested to get people's feedback as to what they're requiring. There is one more question that's come in, which is about another one that I can pick up and answer, Holly, which is probably quite good because you talked a lot. Thank you. And that's about whenever we open anything in the Collins website, it asks for a password. What should we type as password? There is actually, when you're asked for the password, you're asked to email us with details, and we can give you the password. The password is usually a word within the teacher's guide, which enables you as teachers to have access to the extra resources that we provide for you. And we password protect them for one particularly important reason, which is so that we don't end up giving the teachers resources to all of the students with all the answers, and particularly to parents with all the answers, so that you know that your students are getting the best possible teaching and learning from you, rather than just the answers direct. So that's why we password protect them. But yeah, if you email Collins International, we can arrange for you to have the passwords, and that's why they're there. I think that's the end of the questions, which is good. I thought we had some fantastic questions, particularly about the accessibility and the change of thinking and working mathematically from problem solving. Holly, thank you very much for sparing time to be with us to answer questions. It's really appreciated. I have been told that there is one more question, and there are indeed more questions. There is one more question. So you haven't quite got away with it yet, Holly. So the question is, well, in fact, it's another one that I can answer, which is, are the samples of the new books for the different stages, so that we as staff and teachers can plan ahead for the next academic year? So the answer to that is yes, we have samples of the new books. We have printed samples that will be available very soon. And if you're interested in getting a printed sample, again, just drop us an email. We can send you more information. We also have digital e-samples of, I think, quite a lot of these titles now, particularly the students' books, and they're going live on our digital sample site on a daily basis. If you want to have access to our digital sample site, and we can do that very easily, it's the same response, really. Drop us an email at collins.international@hubcollins.co.uk and tell us what school you're from, what subjects you're interested in, and we'll get you access to those digital samples so that you can start looking and planning. Absolutely, we plan to have all of the titles available in very, very good time, so that staff and teachers can plan well ahead for the next year. I think the publication date for all of the primary maths is within the next 4 to 5 weeks, and that's when we'll have final books available, and the digital samples are there as well. So either speak to us directly, or if you have contact with a local rep from Collins, one of my team, just drop them a line. They'll be able to sort it out for you. Stage 4 digital sample not available, Holly. I think that's when will stage 4 be available?
It should be there, actually. I'll chase that up and see where it's got to.
So the answer to that one is very, very soon. So it probably is in a queue to be uploaded and be there in the next day or two, but we'll chase that up, as Holly says. So there's a couple more questions that have come in. Have the Collins Games been aligned with thinking and working mathematically too? So I'm guessing this is the extra resources.
So the games and tools are all still available for the second edition. There's no addition specifically within the tools and games for thinking and working mathematically, but within the teacher's guide plan, there will be instances where the tools are used alongside questions and activities for developing thinking and working mathematically. So that's all laid out for you in the lesson plans, how to incorporate them within it, so they can be used on their own, or also when teaching thinking and working mathematically.
Okay, excellent. So there was a question about covering how can we cover the plan during the pandemic. Obviously, there is a significant challenge to teaching remotely. We've had some webinars that we did and are still available to view towards the back end of last year, where we did some tips about working remotely. So I would look at some of those. The other thing that we have been striving to make sure is available is that there are digital books available, and all of the Collins books, the student book, the workbook, and the teacher's guides are all available in ebook format, which will enable you to learn remotely in a bit more easily, so you don't need the printed textbooks necessarily to be able to deliver it. There's quite a lot of information about tips about delivering maths remotely. I don't know, Holly, if you have any other.
Yeah, I think a lot of our resources will translate to being able to be sent online. All of the teacher's guide resources are available as digital downloads for the first and second edition. So there's lots of ways of using those by computers instead of needing the print editions, and support on there to help with adapting that.
Okay, excellent. There is a question about accessing previous webinars. Yes, my understanding is that you can access recordings of previous webinars on the collins.co.uk website. I'm sure that one of my colleagues will type in the chat box if that's not the case, but I'm pretty sure that those are now available. So I think definitely that is sort of the end of this webinar. So again, thank you, Holly, for sparing the time. Thank you to the Collins International team in the background who have set up the webinar and done all the logistics. I'm hoping that it has been a useful webinar for you, but any comments, definitely we would love to hear them. But most of all, thank you for you to participants for sparing the time to listen to us this morning. We greatly enjoy putting these webinars on, and we hope that they're useful. So from me, it's a thank you to everyone involved. So thank you.